Long ago, before Dambara was a name whispered with fear, it was a land of reverence. The village sat nestled between two great hills and surrounded by ancient trees, their roots said to be the fingers of ancestors who had become one with the earth. The people of Dambara walked with pride then, for they believed their blessings came directly from those who had come before, warriors, mothers, hunters, healers. They sang to the stars and left offerings of milk and kola nut at shrines carved into the bark of sacred trees. Children learned the songs of the dead before they could speak their own names. But war came. Not from within but from across the burning plains. Strangers with red cloth around their arms and ash-colored eyes descended on Dambara, hungry for gold, cattle, and land. When they did not find treasure, they turned to the burial grounds. The graves were dug up with iron shovels and torches, the bones scattered, some taken as trophies. Ancestral skulls were smashed under booted heels. The sacred land screamed, but only the wind listened. After the war, the surviving villagers tried to return to peace. They buried the remnants of their dead again, deeper this time without songs or drums. Silence became tradition. The elders decreed, "Speak not of what was taken. Let the soil forget." But the soil never forgets. In the years that followed, strange things began to happen. Women birthed still children. Goats bled from their eyes. Crops grew but tasted like salt. Yet every time a girl cried out in pain or a mother screamed at night, the elders answered the same, "Silence is safety." It was said, though never in public, that every generation one girl would carry the price of this silence. A girl whose life would be twisted by pain. A girl born under a red moon or beside a dying river. She would know things no one should know. She would see things no one else could see. And when her time came, the whispers would return. Now, under a bleeding moon, a girl kneels alone on the cracked earth. She is clutching something, broken bone-like, in her small hand. Her voice is hoarse from crying, her fingers scraped raw. "Mama," she chokes out, her body trembling. "Why did they do this to you?" The wind answers. Soft, whispered. Almost a lullaby. But it carries no comfort, only the first echo of the curse returning. Amina had not cried since the night her mother died. She was 17 now, and though time had moved on, her grief remained fossilized, buried deep, untouched. Her face, often still as stone, had become a mirror of discomfort for those around her. The villagers called her, the cursed girl. Some said it with pity, most with scorn, and a few with thinly veiled fear. Children were told not to look her in the eyes. Grown men spat in the dust when she walked past. Women clutched their charms tighter when her shadow brushed their doorsteps. It hadn't always been this way. Once her mother Muna had been the heart of Dambara. A healer with hands that coaxed life from herbs and love from pain. She had delivered babies, cured fevers, calmed storms with chants. People came to her barefoot and desperate, and left with hope. But something changed. It began with whispers. The old men in the council hut spoke her name with curled lips. They said she read bones too often. Said she went to the river alone too much. That she questioned the rules. That she taught the girls to speak boldly, to chant the old songs not heard since before the war. Then came the fire. No one saw how it started, only that Muna's hut burned fast and bright one night, and by morning nothing was left but charred beams and a bitter stench. They said it was punishment from the ancestors. That Muna had betrayed the laws. That she had crossed a line. They did not let Amina bury her. Instead they took what remained, bones, cloth, ash, and dumped it in the riverbank where garbage and snake eggs collected. Amina had stood there silently, barefoot in the mud, as her mother's memory was thrown like waste into the current. From that day Amina became invisible. And worse, she became watched. She moved with care, slow and small, like someone trying to disappear into her own shadow. But when she turned 17, something inside her began to stir. Not rage, not yet. Something quieter. A need. She began visiting the river again. Alone. At dusk. While others avoided the place, Amina searched. Her fingers sifted through wet earth, through broken branches and fishbone, until they found pieces that felt too smooth to be stone, too light to be wood. Tiny white fragments, some chipped, some curved like smiles. She never told anyone what she found. She kept them hidden in a satchel made of bark and thread, bones. Her mother's, she believed. She cleaned them with water and wrapped them in dried leaves. At night, she placed them beneath her sleeping mat and whispered to them. She did not cry. Not once. Not even when she bled from cuts or when village boys threw stones at her back. Not when the food seller refused to serve her. Not when her name was left out of the harvest blessings. The village said she was broken. That she lacked feeling. that her silence was proof of the curse. But Amina knew differently. Her silence was not emptiness. It was waiting. She walked through the village like a ghost tethered to grief. When she passed, chickens went quiet. Dogs whined. Old women looked away and muttered prayers. One morning, a small boy named Keto threw a handful of dust in her face and screamed, "Your mother burned because she was evil." Amina didn't flinch. She looked at him, her face unmoving, eyes dark and deep as the river at night. He dropped the rest of the dirt. Ran. She bent down and continued gathering bones. That night, a thin wind passed through the village. It made the doors creak and the shrines moan. A tree by the river split without warning. The elders said it was nothing. Amina, lying on her mat, whispered to the bones beneath her, and for a moment just before she fell asleep she thought she heard them whisper back. The Feast of Silence came every year, like a wound the village reopened willingly. It was held on the first night of the dry season, when the sky turned gold by day and blood orange by dusk. The villagers claimed it honored their peace through obedience, a phrase etched into a wooden plaque nailed crookedly on the old meeting tree. Drums were beaten in slow rhythms. Red silk fluttered from doorways. The elders dressed in bright robes, their faces painted in chalk and ash to mimic ancestral spirits. But the feast was not for joy. It was for remembering how silence had saved them, how the village had survived by burying the truth beneath layers of denial. They honored that silence with forced smiles, loud toasts, and a silence of another kind, the quieting of all dissent, all memory of what had been lost. Amina was forced to serve at the feast. She was given no choice. She wore rags stained from past rains. Her feet were bare, cracked from sun and stone. A shawl hung over her shoulders, not for warmth, but to hide the burn mark that crawled from her collarbone to her neck, shaped like a curling vine. It was the only thing the fire had left her when her mother's hut had burned. She carried plates of roasted goat and bowls of millet beer. Her hands trembled slightly from hunger, not fear. As she weaved between dancing villagers, she heard the muttered words, "The cursed girl." Her mother defied the elders. She should not be here. Then came Elder Django. He was a tall man with a voice like gravel and a laugh that never reached his eyes. His head was bald and shiny, his fingers heavy with rings forged from stolen gold. He had once been one of Muna's patients. Now he was one of her loudest condemners. He stopped her as she passed, holding out his bowl lazily. "Well, well," he sneered loud enough for nearby villagers to hear, "serving food where your mother served fire, are you?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Amina said nothing. "You know," Django continued, sipping his beer, "your mother used to say silence was a sickness. And look where it got her, ashes and shame." Still Amina didn't speak. But her hand just slightly tightened on the clay bowl. He noticed. "Ah, that look. You're just like her." He leaned closer, the stink of fermented grain on his breath. "Dangerous. And stupid." Amina turned and walked away without a word. Not fast. Not slow. Just enough to remind him she was still here. Behind the feast, behind the fire pit and dancing children, behind the laughing drunks and gossips, was a narrow space between two crumbling huts, where the smoke didn't reach and the music faded. Amina stepped into that sliver of quiet to breathe. And there, hunched behind an empty basket, was a girl. She couldn't have been older than 15. Her name was Naima, the baker's niece. Her face was hidden in her arms, shoulders shaking. Amina stood still. After a moment, Naima looked up, eyes swollen and red. She didn't jump. Didn't speak. She just stared at Amina as if seeing something both terrifying and safe. "They told me not to speak," she whispered. "Told me I'd ruin everything if I said what happened." Amina said nothing, but her eyes softened. Naima sniffled. "They told me to smile. Smile and forget. But I can't. I can't." Amina knelt slowly, her knees pressing into the dust beside her. "I heard them talking," Naima went on, "about your mother. How she tried to protect someone, a girl like me. That's why they. Her voice broke. Amina reached into her satchel and drew out a small object, a smooth white shard of bone wrapped in dark red cloth. She held it in both hands and looked at Naima. "She listened," Amina said quietly. "No matter the cost." Naima stared. Her lips trembled. Then she nodded. That night, after the last drumbeat died and the villagers stumbled home with swollen bellies and dry mouths, Amina walked alone to the edge of the forest, where an old, crumbling shrine leaned against a tree. It had once been a place of offerings. Now it was forgotten, smothered in vines and shadow. She knelt there, bone in hand. Carefully, reverently, she dug a small hole beneath the roots with her fingers. She placed the cloth-wrapped bone inside, then covered it with earth and pressed her palm flat against it. The wind stirred. A rustle. A whisper. Not words, not yet. But something ancient. Watching. Amina stood and turned, leaving the shrine in silence. But beneath the earth, the bone pulsed once, like a heart remembering it once lived. The dry season wore on, and with it came the heat that made tempers thin and tongues sharper than blades. Dust clung to the skin like second breath, and the village of Dambara simmered under the weight of old grievances and unspoken truths. The feast of silence had passed, but its bitterness lingered like smoke in the air. It began as many misfortunes in Dambara did, with boys pretending to be men. Near the edge of the village, close to the tree line where the sacred shrines once stood proud but now leaned forgotten, two teenage boys bickered over a slingshot. It had been carved from ebony wood, strong, sleek and likely stolen. The fight escalated quickly. One shoved the other, and the other retaliated with a stone to the forehead. Blood followed. A crowd began to gather. Shouts flew. Mothers pulled their sons away, and the elders approached, robes flaring behind them like wings made of dust. One of the boys, limping and clutching his leg, stumbled back from the group, trying to escape punishment. His foot caught something. Not a root. Something harder. Rounder. It shifted under him and he fell with a cry. The boy's hand clawed at the ground to steady himself, and his fingers closed around a smooth, white object protruding from the dirt. A bone. He scrambled back, throwing it from him like it burned. It landed with a dull clack. Others stepped forward. Elder Django was first. He bent, grunted and pulled at the soil. Another bone emerged. Then another. Someone gasped. "These are not animal bones," murmured Elder Sephu, his narrow eyes sharp with memory. "Look at the curve. The carvings. This one's a woman's femur." A hush fell. Only Amina, standing at a distance, frozen mid-step with a basket of herbs in her hand, knew exactly what they had found. The cloth she had wrapped around one of the bones had come loose, revealing a faded red thread, the kind her mother used to stitch herbs into prayer bundles. It was Muna's. "She's been hiding relics," someone said. "Burying cursed bones," cried another. "She means to bring the dead back. She wants revenge." The crowd turned. Faces twisted with fear, then rage. Amina stood very still. She did not run. She did not speak. The elders approached her. Elder Django held the bone in his hand as though it were a sword. "You buried your mother's remains like offerings to dark spirits?" "She was not buried at all," Amina said, voice even. "You threw her into the river like trash. I only gave her back to the earth." That was enough. They seized her arms, yanked the basket from her grasp, and dragged her across the village. Dust rose in clouds as her feet skidded. Children screamed. Some cried. Others followed in stunned silence. The square had been swept clean earlier that day in preparation for the market. Now it would serve another purpose. Elder Django raised the bone to the sky. "For the protection of this village and in the name of the ancestors who demand order," he boomed, "this girl will be punished for defiling sacred ground. She has tampered with spirits and buried cursed remains. She will be beaten with the very bones she dared to hide." "No," someone whispered. It was Naima peeking from a doorway. But no one heard her. Or maybe they chose not to. They tied Amina's arms to the village post, the same one used for tethering goats and thieves. Her wrists were bound so tight they bruised before the first blow. Her back faced the crowd. Her hair hung loose like a curtain of shadow. The sun sat high, cruel and unmoved. Django approached. In his hand a long femur bone. He struck. The first hit echoed through the square like a drumbeat. Amina gasped but didn't scream. The second blow came harder, cracking across her shoulder. The bone had chipped at the edge, a jagged line forming where once there had been healing chants and herbal threads. She staggered. Her knees bent but did not fall. The wind stirred. It was soft at first, like a sigh. But then it rose. Leaves rustled, though no trees stood nearby. Baskets toppled from tables. Birds shrieked and scattered. Django raised the bone again. Another hit. Amina flinched. Blood began to bead on her back. The wind howled. Flames from a nearby cooking pot stretched unnaturally high, dancing in blue tongues instead of red. Villagers gasped and backed away. Then, the bones in Django's hand trembled. He stopped mid-strike and looked at them, confused. His grip loosened. The bone pulsed once in his hand, not visibly but deeply like a beat beneath the skin. He stumbled back. Amina raised her head. Her face was pale, streaked with sweat and blood, but her eyes burned. The ground beneath her feet began to crack, thin fractures forming in the dirt like veins. A smell rose from the earth, not rot, not fire, but memory. The scent of herbs, of rain, of her mother's voice. The crowd was silent now. The flames flickered blue again. And the wind whispered through the square, a voice faint but undeniable. She is not alone. Django dropped the bone. It clattered against the stones, then stilled. Amina stood shaking but standing. Tied and bleeding but whole. And in that moment the villagers saw not a cursed girl, but something else. Something ancient. Something waking. The villagers had untied her only when they thought she was no longer breathing. Her body, broken and limp, had been carted in a wheelbarrow like discarded wood and dumped at the edge of the forest. No burial. No prayers. No final words. Just silence. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon. Night crept in like a veil, thick, warm, and heavy with the scent of earth and shadow. Amina lay there, half-conscious, her blood mixing with the dust beneath her, the weight of every bruise and fracture pressing her into the soil. She could not lift her head. She could barely blink. The pain clung to her ribs, her back, her lungs. And yet, she was alive. Barely. She drifted in and out of blackness. Shapes and shadows moved behind her eyelids. Faces. Some familiar, others too old to place. Hands reaching. Not cruel. Not warm either. Just waiting. Then through the stillness a sound came. Soft. Almost a hum. Not wind. Not animal. A whisper. At first it was indistinct, like distant water lapping against stone. But slowly it began to form syllables, rounded and slow, spoken in a rhythm like breath. She did not recognize the language, not consciously. But her bones did. Her blood did. It thrummed through her like heartbeat returning. Amina's eyes opened, cracked and rimmed with tears she hadn't known she could still produce. The world above her blurred, black canopy, silver sky, stars like slivers of bone. The whisper came again, closer now. A low woman's voice, hoarse, deep, steady as the river at midnight. Daughter? Amina blinked. Her breath hitched. I am not silent. She tried to sit up, but the pain laced through her spine like fire. She gasped. The voice didn't stop. It came from everywhere and nowhere, the wind, the trees, the earth beneath her. It was a voice she knew before she had words. A voice that used to sing to her as a child when fevers rattled her bones. A voice that once spoke over herbs boiling in a pot. They thought they scattered me. But we are not broken. Only buried. Amina's hand moved weakly across the ground, searching. Her fingers found her satchel, torn, crusted with blood. It had been thrown from her body but not far. Somehow it had remained intact. She pulled it close, breath ragged. Inside, the bones she had collected, her mother's bones, still rested wrapped in the red cloth. One of them glowed faintly now. A soft light, not blinding, just enough to touch her skin with warmth. Then something fluttered down from the trees. A silver moth, large as her palm, shimmered in the moonlight. It circled above her chest and slowly descended, landing gently at the base of her throat. It did not move again. Amina stared at it, her lips trembling. She felt its weight, impossibly light, but more than physical. As though something ancient had chosen her. Marked her. The whisper returned. The silence ends with you. Speak even if your voice breaks. Rise even if your bones tremble. You are the daughter of memory. Of fire. Of me. And for the first time since her mother's death, Amina wept. Not from pain. Not from fear. But from release. Tears slid down her bruised cheeks, mixing with dirt and ash. She didn't wipe them away. She let them fall freely, soaking into the soil that had once been sacred. Every drop a defiance. Every sob a rebellion. The bones pulsed again, brighter now. The cloth around them quivered as if breathing. Slowly, shakily, Amina pushed herself up. Her arms shook beneath her weight. Blood crusted down her back. Her legs ached. But she rose. Inch by inch. Breath by breath. She stood, swaying beneath the canopy, the silver moth still resting against her chest as if guarding her heart. The forest had gone quiet, not dead but listening. Amina tilted her head back. Looked at the sky. The stars above pulsed in silence. She whispered only one word. Mama. And somewhere beyond the trees, beyond time, something answered. The forest welcomed her. It did not fear her silence. It did not flinch from the blood that stained her back or the wildness in her eyes. As Amina walked, slow, barefoot, and trembling, roots seemed to rise and soften beneath her feet. Leaves rustled gently overhead as though bowing. The silver moth remained perched at her collar, unmoving, glowing faintly like a forgotten star returned. She didn't know where she was going at first. She let the voice in her chest guide her, more instinct than memory. The path twisted through thickets and shadows, far from the trails known to villagers. The deeper she went, the more she felt watched, but not with suspicion. With recognition. Then she saw it. The Hill of Forgotten Women. It wasn't a hill in the way maps would draw it, no towering rise or rocky peak. Just a gentle swell of earth in the forest's heart, blanketed in wildflowers and vines. But the air shifted here. Thick with something sacred. The wind no longer whispered, it hummed. The soil smelled of root and blood and ancient things not spoken of in the village anymore. Amina stood at its base, breath shallow. She remembered her mother's stories, shared in hushed tones during late nights over simmering tea. Stories of women who had vanished from Dambara, accused of witchcraft, disobedience, unnatural births, or simply for knowing too much. They hadn't died. They had come here. She climbed. At the top, half hidden behind curtains of moss and thorns, was a circle of low huts and a tall tree in the center with a trunk split in two, like open arms. Smoke curled from chimneys. She saw no one. But she knew she was not alone. Then the wind shifted, and from behind the tree stepped a woman so old her skin looked carved from bark. Her spine curved like a crescent moon. She wore a necklace made of teeth, seeds, and bone. Her eyes, though clouded with age, pierced through Amina like sunlight through smoke. "You walk with spirits," the woman said. Her voice was rough, dry as dry season earth. "And pain. But not fear. That's good." Amina swayed. The strength she had borrowed from the forest was fading. Before she could fall, strong arms caught her. More women emerged. Some old, some young. A few with scars like hers, others with tribal marks long outlawed. They carried her gently, wordlessly, into a hut woven from reeds and love. They stripped away the bloodied rags. Cleaned her wounds with herbs soaked in oils that smelled like her childhood. They sang, not words but tones that vibrated through her bones. When she awoke hours or days later, the old woman was beside her again. "I am Mama Yara," she said. "I walked with your mother once, long ago." Amina turned her face slowly, lips cracked. "You knew Muna?" "We all did." Mama Yara smiled faintly. "She was one of us. A daughter of the in-between. She came here many times. Left offerings. Asked questions others were too afraid to ask." Amina tried to sit, but her body protested. She winced. "You've been chosen," Mama Yara said, dipping a cloth in water and placing it gently on her brow. "Not by us. By the ones who came before. The ancestors remember." Tears pricked Amina's eyes, but she held them back this time. "They said my mother was a curse," she whispered. "They broke her. And me." Mama Yara reached into her satchel and pulled out a sprig of bright green herb, long leaves red at the tips. She pressed it into Amina's palm. "You are not broken," she said. "You are becoming." Later that evening they let her walk alone through the glade. Her steps were slow, each movement a labor, but she needed the quiet. The air here was thicker but not heavy. Alive. She paused near the center tree, placed her palm against its bark and felt warmth buzz beneath her skin. Her wound had reopened just slightly. A single drop of blood fell into the soil at her feet. And where it landed, something miraculous happened. A green shoot burst from the dirt, fast, urgent, alive. It unfurled two leaves shaped like eyes. Amina stepped back, breath caught in her throat. Another drop fell. Another shoot bloomed. She knelt, trembling, staring at the sudden garden growing from her blood. Behind her, Mama Yara spoke gently. "She walks with you, Muna. Always." Amina closed her eyes, feeling the earth hum through her. The silver moth rose from her shoulder and flew into the branches. And for the first time, Amina understood. She had not come here to hide. She had come to rise. That night, the dreams returned, only this time they were not memories or shadows. They were summons. Amina lay curled beneath a woven blanket of bark and soft fur, the scent of salves and herbs clinging to her skin. A low fire crackled outside the hut, but inside all was still. Her breath slowed, her body healing in quiet rebellion against the violence it had endured. Then came the first whisper. It did not come through her ears. It moved through her ribs, like music too old for words. She saw a dark space, black as ash but filled with motion. Bones. Hundreds of them. Rising from the dirt. Crawling across the ground like pale insects. Some small as finger joints, others long as walking staffs. They were not scattered, not broken. They moved with purpose. One by one they found each other. A skull rolled across the dust and nestled atop a spine. Ribs curved and clicked into place. Pelvis, knees, arms, fingers, all assembling into the shape of a woman. Not her mother. Every mother. Amina watched, frozen. Then the woman made of bone turned. Empty sockets locked with her eyes. The jaw opened, not to scream but to speak. You must go back. Amina took a step toward the figure, unsure whether her feet touched ground or dream. Why? She asked. Her voice sounded younger. Afraid. The bones shifted, reached toward her. Their finger pointed beyond the forest, toward Dambara. They disturbed the dead. Then the earth shook beneath her in the dream. The bones shattered. The whisper became a roar. She woke gasping, bathed in sweat, fists clenched around her satchel. And the bones inside it rattled. Far away in Dambara, the village began to unravel. At first it was small. A sour stench rising from the river that refused to fade. Fishermen cast their nets only to pull up rotting frogs and bloated eels with milky eyes. The water turned thick, darker with each passing day, black as tar by the end of the week. The elders sent boys to collect water from farther upstream, blaming the change on forest decay. But then came the blood. Elder Sephu was the first. He awoke screaming, clutching his nose as crimson poured from both nostrils. His wife said he had been mumbling in his sleep, chanting in some foreign tongue, a sound she swore was not human. The next morning it was Elder Django. Then two more. They all described the same dream, bones knocking together, a tree split in half and a voice saying, "You buried your truth. We rise." Children cried incessantly when brought near the village square. Newborns refused to nurse or sleep. The town healer, Old Naik, tried every herb she knew. Nothing worked. At night, the wind carried strange sounds, low moans, high whistles, laughter that vanished when approached. Fire struggled to stay lit. Chickens stopped laying eggs. The air felt thick, buzzing with invisible things watching from unseen corners. And still Amina walked. She moved through the forest like a shadow returned to form. The bruises on her body had faded to ghostly stains, but her gaze was sharper now, her steps rooted. She wore a cloak made of stitched leaves and bark, a staff at her side, and a pouch at her hip, tied tight with red cord. Inside it, the bones whispered even without wind. They pulsed gently when she walked. But when she passed close to certain places, they rattled violently. The first time it happened, she was near a hollow tree not far from the border of Dambara. Her fingers grazed its bark, and the bones in her pouch jumped like fish in a trap. She paused. Listened. Silence. Then, softly in her mind, the bones spoke. Liar's tongue carved this tree. Amina frowned. She pressed her hand against the wood and felt a memory not hers. A village girl tied there by her uncle after she had tried to run. Her mouth had been gagged. Her hands, bound in front of the ancestors' tree so she could be taught silence. The girl had vanished a week later. The tree still stood. The lie still clung to its trunk. Amina stepped back, trembling. She whispered an old prayer her mother used to say when planting herbs. Return what was stolen. Reclaim what was denied. A branch cracked above. A crow flew down and circled her head once before vanishing into the trees. Each day Amina went farther. Past forgotten graves. Past sunken shrines where moss had swallowed the names of ancestors. She listened. The bones guided her. They pulsed at crossroads, rattled at broken wells, thumped at the steps of abandoned huts. Each time she whispered back. At night, she lit small fires and spoke to her mother's remains piece by piece. She didn't need full skeletons to feel their presence anymore. A knuckle bone could reveal a truth. A cracked jaw could sing a name. She wasn't alone. The spirits had awakened, and through her they were beginning to remember everything. In Dambara the elders gathered in panic. "We are cursed," Sephu said, bleeding from the ear now. "Something has returned." Django scowled, face pale. "That girl. Amina. She lives still. She should have died." "We beat her," muttered another. "But did we break her?" They sent 3 hunters into the forest with spears, tasked with finding her and finishing what had begun. None returned. One night later, a figure was seen at the edge of the village. A girl cloaked in shadow, bones tied at her waist, eyes reflecting the firelight with unnatural stillness. When a villager tried to approach, the ground cracked under his feet, and a burst of moths swarmed from the trees, silver wings glinting. No one followed her again. Amina did not enter Dambara yet. Not fully. But with each step, each whisper, each lie the bones uncovered, the veil between the dead and the living grew thinner. And the village that once tried to silence her could feel it. She was not coming for revenge. She was coming for truth. They heard her before they saw her. A sound like wind rustling through dead leaves, low and constant, stirred through the village of Dambara. The old women sitting on stools outside their doors stood slowly, blinking against a sudden chill that did not match the season. Babies whimpered in their mothers' arms. Roosters fled their own coops. And then came the moths. Dozens of them, silver-winged and silent, pouring in from the trees like a river of moonlight. They swirled through the village paths, dancing around rooftops, brushing against faces without landing. Crows followed in a wide arc overhead, silent watchers in the sky. At the heart of this procession walked Amina. She was barefoot, but her steps made no sound. Her skin was no longer raw with pain, but bronzed and smooth, pulsing faintly with light, like a flame under skin. Vines threaded through her hair and shoulders, living things that curled and moved as though breathing. Around her waist, her satchel of bones rattled softly, but no one mistook it for anything harmless now. She looked not like a girl returning home. She looked like a truth that had come to collect its due. Villagers froze where they stood. Some dropped baskets, others fell to their knees without knowing why. A few of the elders ran into their huts, slamming doors shut as if wood could keep her out. But the square, where they had tied her, beaten her, and left her for dead, stood open. That was where she went. She stepped into the center of the square, beneath the meeting tree, and stood tall. The moths formed a ring around her, crows settling silently in the branches overhead. The villagers began to gather, drawn by fear, awe, and a pull they could not name. Elder Django stepped out from the crowd, trying to hide the way his hands trembled. "Amina," he called, his voice too loud, too rehearsed, "you dare return after what you've done?" "I return for what was done," she said, her voice calm, steady. Her eyes scanned the crowd. "I do not speak for revenge," she said. "I speak for truth." She untied the satchel and let it fall open in her hands. The bones, still wrapped in the red cloth, clean and glinting faintly with a soft blue light, rose into the air. Gasps rippled through the crowd. They did not rise as if thrown. They floated, gently, deliberately, until they hovered before her in a perfect line. Then they began to rearrange. A jawbone met with a skull fragment. Fingers aligned beside ribs. The bones knit together not as flesh would, but with the memory of how they had once been whole. No full body formed, only enough to create presence. And then from within them, a voice came. Not Amina's. Her mother's. "Muna," someone whispered in terror. The voice was not shouted. It was soft, certain, and undeniable. "Each lie you told will now be weighed." The air grew dense. Heavy. As if truth had become a physical force. Amina raised her hand, palm open. A silver moth landed on her thumb. The bones turned in the air, facing the elders. Elder Sephu stepped back, sweat beading on his brow. "This is a trick," he muttered. "No," the voice said. "This is remembrance." Elder Sephu's nose began to bleed. He staggered, mouth opening, but no words came. He dropped to his knees. Then to his side. The crowd erupted into screams. Panic spread like fire. People shoved each other, ran for cover, tried to climb fences or pull children away. But the moths blocked every exit. They did not attack. They simply hovered, watching. Containing. Elder Django grabbed a staff from the ground, pointing it at Amina. "You bring curses. You've become what your mother was." Amina looked at him, eyes aglow. "She was a healer," she said. "A truth keeper. You feared her power, so you burned her. But you could not burn the truth." The bones spun once in the air, then pointed directly at Django. He laughed nervously, wiped his forehead. "You've bewitched them. They don't know what they're seeing." He coughed. Then again. He pressed a hand to his mouth. Blood poured from between his fingers. The staff fell. He dropped to the ground, heaving, body convulsing. Amina did not move. She stood in the eye of the chaos, untouched, glowing softly like a lantern lit from within. The bones hovered back to her, floating into her satchel one by one, wrapped once more in the red cloth. As the last bone settled, the wind stilled. The moths stopped circling. The crows lifted into the air with a rush of feathers and vanished. Amina looked at the crowd, shaken, pale, silent now. "You tried to bury her," she said. "You tried to bury me. But we rise." A woman in the crowd dropped to her knees. A second followed. Then a third. One by one heads bowed, not in worship but in shame. Amina turned, slowly, and walked from the square, vines trailing behind her, moths still following in quiet procession. And behind her, the village of Dambara was no longer certain who their ancestors had truly blessed. The silence that followed was unlike any Dambara had ever known. Not the false silence of denial, nor the quiet of buried truths. This was a silence thick with reckoning, heavy, alive, expectant. As if the land itself held its breath, waiting to see who would kneel, and who would run. The villagers began to gather again, slowly. This time not with torches, not with accusations, but with eyes lowered, hands trembling. Shame hung from their shoulders like wet cloth. Some begged forgiveness. On their knees, heads pressed to the dust, they cried out to Amina and to the spirits they had once mocked. "We didn't know," they said. "We were afraid." Others broke down into confession, spilling names, events, years of secrets stored behind locked mouths. One man admitted to framing a healer to keep his wife from learning the truth about their child. An elder wept as she confessed to burning sacred scrolls because they carried the voices of women. Even the midwife, old now and shaking, said through choked sobs, "I delivered you, Amina. Your mother begged me to protect you. I was too afraid." Amina listened. She did not speak. She simply stood, still cloaked in vines, the bones at her side now silent. And then from the crowd stepped a familiar figure, Naima, the girl who had once wept behind the feast baskets, afraid to speak. But now she stood tall. She moved beside Amina, barefoot and shaking, but unafraid. She raised her chin, looked at the people who once averted their eyes from her pain. "They told me to stay silent," she said clearly. "But silence nearly killed me." Her voice trembled. "Elder Django," he said, "if I spoke I would bring shame to my family. That no one would believe me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Naima's hands tightened at her sides. "He did to me what no man should ever do to a child. And when I went to Muna she promised she would protect me. She was the only one who believed me. That's why they burned her." The words struck like thunder. A cry rose from one woman, then another. Mothers who had lost daughters, sisters who had whispered suspicions but said nothing. The village's sins, long buried, now poured out like floodwater breaching a broken dam. Then the air changed again. The trees rustled in unison, and from the forest came the sound of feet, soft, many, sure. The hill women had come. Mama Yara walked at the front, her staff thudding gently against the earth. Behind her trailed a dozen others, healers, midwives, truth singers and spirit callers. Some wore shells in their hair. Others bore tattoos of old symbols that glowed faintly under the fading sun. They formed a circle around Amina and Naima, arms linked, chanting in low harmony. It was not loud, but it was unshakable, a melody older than any written word. Amina lowered her satchel to the ground. The bones, her mother's bones, lifted once more, glowing softly in the dusk light. But this time they did not assemble. They scattered. One by one, the bones flew gently from her pouch and landed in the soil around the square. At each landing, the ground cracked slightly, drank deeply, as if welcoming something home. The bones did not lie still. They sank. They disappeared beneath the earth like seeds. Then came a pause. The chant rose. And from the places where the bones had been planted, flowers bloomed. Not ordinary flowers. They were red, deep red, like blood under moonlight, and their petals pulsed gently with heat. Their scent was rich, sharp, and oddly sweet, like rain on dry ash. The hill women chanted louder. Amina fell to her knees, watching as the square bloomed before her, the cursed soil now transformed. The earth that once bore lies now bore life. "She is cleansed," Mama Yara said, eyes closed, tears on her cheeks. A great wind rushed through the village, not fierce but full, as if something long trapped had finally exhaled. The flowers bent slightly as if bowing. The soil, once soaked in shame, now glowed faintly where the roots touched. And through the hush that followed, the villagers saw clearly what they had tried to bury. Muna had not cursed the village. She had tried to heal it. Years passed and Dambara changed. Not all at once. Not easily. But slowly, like roots reaching through hard earth. The Feast of Silence was never celebrated again. The elders who once ruled through fear were replaced by voices that listened. The square was rebuilt, not as a place of punishment but as a garden. The red flowers that had bloomed from Muna's bones continued to grow, even through droughts, even in seasons when nothing else survived. But the most wondrous thing was the tree. It rose at the edge of the forest where the village met the wild, tall, wide-limbed, and impossibly shaped like a woman with arms stretched open. Her trunk curved like a back in mid-embrace. Her bark shimmered slightly in moonlight, and from her branches hung thin, delicate leaves that rustled even when the wind was still. They called it the bone tree. No one planted it. No one saw it grow. One day it was just there, rooted in the exact spot where Amina had last stood with her satchel of bones. Some said it grew from her mother's spirit. Others whispered it was Amina herself transformed. But all agreed on one thing. The tree listened. Travelers came from far villages to see it. Healers, orphans, widows, even children too young to understand why their hearts ached would find themselves standing beneath her branches, drawn by something deeper than memory. They said if you knelt, placed your hand to the roots and whispered a truth, not a wish, not a lie but a truth, the tree would bloom. Only red flowers. Always red. They bloomed instantly, silently, and without fail. A girl whispered, "I'm afraid to go home," and petals rained gently down on her shoulders. A man confessed, "I loved him but I let them shame me," and blossoms opened across the tree's base like fire. Some truths were light. Some were painful. But all were honored. The story of Amina became legend, passed from mouth to mouth, carved into drums, sung in lullabies. Children in Dambara would gather around the garden where the first red flowers bloomed and say, "She was beaten with her mother's bones," but the bones whispered back. They said she lived many more years in the forest, walking barefoot and never alone, always with moths, always with crows, and always with the bones of truth nestled close to her heart. And though she was never seen again after the day of the reckoning, her presence lingered. In the vines that moved when no wind stirred. In the way the red flowers only bloomed for the honest. In the tree that embraced every burden whispered into its bark. Because some stories do not end. Some stories root. And Amina's truth, her pain, her strength, her mother's voice, would never be silenced again.